One thing that pastors do very well is ask pedantic questions, and that's exactly what I want to do today. Is there a difference between love and desire? I think there is. There's a subtle nuance between these two things, even though they're obviously linked together. I mean, generally speaking, when we say we love something, we also have desire for that. But yet there seems to be some verb difference in here. I mean, if I love something, it's kind of a state of how I perceive it, right? How I let, my thoughts and my reactions to that thing be influenced by my affections. But desire seems to be somehow tied more to the idea of pursuit, that if I desire something, then I'm going to try to go after it, or I'm going to try to acquire it or secure it or something like that. I bring this up because when you look at how God treats mankind, He doesn't only love them from a distance. God is not a deist. He's not some individual that's sitting up in the clouds just kind of watching everything from a third-party perspective. God actively pursues us. And you see this throughout the entire Bible, God pursuing His creation even after they get distracted, even after they make mistakes, even after they rebel. God pursuing us at every single step. God very clearly desires us. And why would He do that? Well, you can see this when you look at the actual story of creation itself. It says it right there that when God created Adam and Eve, that man was created in God's own image. You could also see more of this God imagery in what was instructed to Adam. You see, Adam was not just told to just simply exist and to be some kind of tchotchke that was sitting on a shelf somewhere in the Garden of Eden. Instead, Adam was actively told to fill the earth. He was given a job to do, to care after this creation. And all of these instructions to Adam and the way Adam is created paint this image of somebody who's being expected to act in a way that models the Creator. I want you to catch that what God was asking Adam to do was, in effect, to act as a proxy of God on all of creation. To give you a metaphor, it's almost as if God was creating this masterpiece, this work of art throughout the entire universe, and He desired to have a signature on this work of art, and that signature is mankind. It's kind of a crazy thought if you think about it, but yet it's a very apt analogy when you look at what God is asking Adam to actually do. Now, the reason why I connect this to this idea of pursuit is because you can see how God is moved to treat this signature that He puts on creation when that signature starts writing something that isn't God. When sin enters into the equation, it would have been very easy for God to just say, well, that's it, nothing more, we're not going to do anything, you screwed up, and because you screwed up, it is what it is, and you're just bound for destruction. But that's not what you see. There's this interesting little nuance that takes place in Genesis 2 that I think sometimes people just kind of blow right past. And this, that Adam and Eve, they sin. They go against what God has asked them to do, and as a result, there's going to be consequences. But before those consequences occur, I want you to ask yourself this. Was God ignorant to the fact that Adam and Eve had sinned? Did God suddenly stop being omniscient in that moment and not realize that Adam and Eve had done something against what God had instructed them to do? Well, no, of course not. God knew the entire time what had happened. So why is it that God, being all-knowing, knowing that Adam and Eve had sinned, still went into the garden to go find Adam and Eve? When Adam and Eve hid from God, why did God call out to Adam and Eve? God knew what happened. It's not like He was caught off guard. He knew exactly the sin that had entered into His perfect creation. He is the perfect God, and He certainly would know that imperfection had entered into this very holy, sanctified place. But yet God calls out. This is something that may seem so simple, but it's actually very, very important. It's very deliberately placed there in the Bible that God is pursuing His creation even as they sin. The reason why I bring up this idea of desire when it comes to this series of Thanksgiving is because that desire is what leads to a God that wants to redeem us, that pursues us, even though we sin over and over and over again. it's something for us to be thankful for, to have a God that doesn't just look for us and then say, you know what, I give you up to the desires that you clearly want. Instead, we have a God that says, I desire you so much that no matter what happens, no matter how dirty and profane sin makes things, I will continue to pursue you, and I will continue to provide you a pathway back to me. This idea of God's desire is really foundational to the idea of redemption, and it's something that you see over and over and over again. Think of it this way: redemption is really just God's way of demonstrating and putting into action His desire for us, His pursuit of us. You can actually see this at the very end of that story of Adam and Eve that we were just talking about a second ago. Towards the very, very end of this story of sin entering into creation in Genesis 3, you end up seeing God doing something interesting where it says that God created clothes from the skins of animals for Adam and Eve. Now, the reason why that's so profound is because what Adam and Eve did as soon as they sinned and realized they were shameful, they tried to create clothes of themselves out of leaves. And so what we are seeing here is God creating something that is sufficient to cover over their shame. There's a lot of allegory and metaphor that takes place in these first few chapters, but what you end up taking away from this is that God is atoning. He's covering over the shame of Adam and Eve. So even though they are suffering with their shame, and even though they've already made clothes, so they're no longer naked, God gives them something better. He gives them something sufficient. So what you're seeing there is that first indication of God's pursuit of mankind. You move forward a few chapters and you end up seeing the story of Noah. And here you have a very obvious example where Noah is living in a time of great wickedness, but despite that, God pursues His creation. He could have just racked the board and said, okay, we're just going to start over from scratch, but He didn't. He said, I'm going to pursue my creation and provide this pathway for redemption using my servant Noah through the ark. Even when you go many chapters and books after that, you end up seeing this example of God's pursuit, even with deep individual personal sin. I mean, if you think of Adam and Eve being this existential sin that God pursued us through, and then you see almost this societal sin, if you want to think of it that way, where human society had become wicked, and so God pursues us despite that through Noah. Now you can see personal sin, where it starts becoming very personal and relatable to us in certain ways. And that is through the sin of David. When David sinned with Bathsheba, then he ended up committing adultery with this woman. Well, this woman became pregnant, and the penalty for David's sin was going to be death. This child, the way it's kind of theologically instructed is that this child was the child of sin, and so that child was not going to live. This was something that God communicated through the prophet Nathan to King David, and that child ended up dying. Now you might look at that and just say, I don't see any desire there, I don't see any redemption, but I want you to think about this. What happens following that moment? Once again, if this were something that we were somehow observing or that we were the judge over, we could easily look at David and say, you sinned, this marriage is sinful that you have with this woman, it shouldn't happen, and so you just need to go your separate way. But that's not what God does. He provides a pathway out. He pursues His servant David, and He does that through blessing them with another child. A child that would be King Solomon. An individual that obviously is foundational to so much that ends up happening there in this early kingdom of Israel and Judah. This is yet another example of God's desire of us, that you can see that whether it's the big picture existential threat of sin, whether it's cultural, societal, people groups sinning, or whether it's us sinning as individuals, that God desires us and He pursues us all the same. You know, it kind of begs the question, when you see individuals who feel like they exist outside of the forgiveness, outside of the love, and outside of the redemption of Jesus Christ, what is it that you feel you've done that is so big that God would not continue to pursue you? Because when you look at the testimony of the scriptures, what you can see is that there is nothing that will keep God from his most beloved of creation. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that for everyone who believes shall not perish, but shall be saved. We've all heard John 3:16, and it's something that I think sometimes we say so often that it kind of ceases to have this deep, powerful, profound meaning that it really has. Jesus Christ is God's ultimate pursuit of us. God didn't have to do this. He could have just continued to have the covenants that existed to say, look, you hold up your end of the bargain, I'll hold up my end of the bargain. You don't hold up your end of the bargain and you get judgment. He could have wiped the slate clean like he did with Noah. He could have just in the very beginning said, nope, you have sinned, no more mankind, and I'll just create another part of creation that reflects me. But instead, he chose love, and he chose to exhibit that love through his very active desire of us. You know, one of the things that I think is kind of an amazing metaphor here is something that a really good friend used to bring up whenever he would preach. He would talk about adoption and how laws surrounding adoption are interesting. In some states, it's actually far more difficult to separate a child from a parent when that child is a child of adoption, because the idea is that rather than it being, the result of a biological something, is that adult went out of their way to choose that child. And because of that bond is far, far, far more profound. Well, God chose you. God chose you as his child. And what Romans actually tells us is that as children, we are actually heirs of this promise. We've come full circle back to what God intended with the person of Adam, that we are God's signature on this creation. And if in the very beginning, the original intent may have been that we will be his perfect signature, what we end up seeing now is that we continue to be that signature, not because of who we are, but because of what God exhibits through our testimony, not through our actions and not through our worthiness and not through anything that we earn or anything that we become, but through what God has demonstrated through us. God's perfect love, which is proven through his perfect pursuit. God's desire is an amazing thing. It's something that should drive us to be immensely thankful, because there is nothing that can keep us from his love. There's nothing that can keep us from his presence. God is God just as much yesterday as he is today, and as much as he ever will be, and his love will always remain true. It is something to be thankful for, that no matter what you have done, no matter what you may be doing now, and no matter what mistake you may perform or commit in the future, God continues to pursue you, and he proved it through giving his Son, Jesus Christ. That is something that we should surely be thankful for. That's our lesson that I have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.